It's been a day, Laura.
Hasn't it just? My gosh.
We've just finished interviewing Dr. James Brown.
We have indeed. And he tried and succeeded to make us cry because we were already in quite an emotional state because we've just been in local press bearing our souls, which, although we do that on the podcast, felt all the more emotional seeing it in black and white and having feedback from people that potentially weren't listening to the podcast.
Yeah, it's quite scary.
Yeah, it's quite scary and quite emotional. But yeah, so we are totes emosh. And then to top it off, you then had a message.
Yeah, we had a message from a girl who is at university who had messaged us before saying that she didn't realise she could get a diagnosis through the university, and it wasn't until listening to her podcast that she realised she could. So she's went out and sought that help, and today she just got confirmation that she has ADHD.
Yeah, she's been diagnosed off the back of it.
Now she's going to get help and support in place so that she can get through uni.
So we were in tears before we spoke to James Brown.
Yeah, so to know that, that we've helped her get there is nothing short of incredible.
Yeah.
And I'm so happy for her, so that now she's in a position to get the help that she needs.
And I think also is with regards to reflecting on our own journeys in the press and then speaking to James, we have just interviewed him, is that he was talking about purpose and it just really hit pretty hard, didn't it?
Yeah.
It's just this idea of we have suffered a lot as we've stated on the podcast and now in the newspaper, is that it feels like it was worth it. I'm going to try not to
Yeah, it does. It feels very much like what we're doing is worth it. Without further ado,
shit.
Let's introduce Dr. James Brown.
For anyone who doesn't know, Dr. James Brown is Associate Professor, School of Biosciences, Aston University, is co-founder of the charity ADHD Adults UK, is co-founder of Focus, a free online magazine about adult ADHD. And I've lost the rest. James co-hosts the ADHD Adults Podcast with Dr. Alex Connor, which has and continues to be an enormous help to us both on our late ADHD diagnosis journeys. James writes for The Independent and is a TV contributor, including Trust Me, I'm a Doctor for the BBC. In short, the man is a legend. I accidentally called him a twat. We had a lovely old chat. And we just want to say thank you so much, James. We can't wait for the interview. Well, we can't wait to share the interview with you. How's that?
ADHDS females, ADHDAF. ADHDS females, the podcast.
Hi, I'm Dawn.
Hi, I'm Laura, and we are ADHDAF. Seriously. We are two neurodivergent neighbours who moved to the same street at the same time, at the same age, with the same undiagnosed disability. What are the chances?
Since discovering the enormous impact ADHD has had on our lives and the horrifying numbers of missed and undiagnosed females, it has become our mission to make some serious noise.
We want to use our voices to raise awareness, break the stigma, and share our experiences in the hope that they help others.
So join us for a chat, or as it's called up here in Aberdeen, a blether.
Trigger warning, we will be covering some really sensitive topics, so please do have a read of the description of each episode before listening.
It's important to note that we are not medical professionals, we're not therapists or coaches, we're not qualified to offer advice or support. What we will do is share our experiences alongside resources and information from professionals. We will talk over each other and we will go off topic and forget the point mid-sentence.
We are both assigned female at birth, which means that we can only speak from the experience of life as AFAB people. However, ADHDAF is an inclusive space. Whatever your gender, you are very welcome here.
Yes, you are.
ADHDS females, ADHDAF.
Hello, welcome, Dr. James Brown.
Hi, how are you two?
Oi, oi! Sorry, I just had to do an inappropriate greeting on behalf of Alex
And
Connor.
while we're here, fit like from Aberdeen.
Honestly, you've just given me, I swear I've got PTSD from working with Alex, because when you did that, my kind of knee-jerk reaction was to abuse you and throw as many of the worst swear words. It's just, honestly, it's like a knee-jerk reaction. If anyone says a stupid hello now, then it gets my back up. But yeah, no, hi guys, it's lovely to be on your podcast.
Hello, thank you so much for coming on our podcast. We really are so grateful that you would give up your time to talk to us this afternoon.
Extremely.
You won't be grateful when it's the worst performing podcast episode that you've produced and nobody listens to it, and you get complaints about how crap I was as a guest. But I definitely appreciate you giving me the opportunity to ruin your podcast.
It's all right. I single-handedly managed to do that for us anyway.
No,
Awesome.
not at all.
If I fall over my words and stutter and lose my place, then yeah, you're just going to have to deal with it.
It's fine. We're all in the same boat.
We are. I work with Alex, so anything is, anything's. It's a low bar. Anything's up from that. So
I think we've managed to persuade him to come on as well. So
amazing, amazing. That'll be worse in this episode. Now I feel competitive, because if Alex is coming on, he'll never let it end if he somehow presents himself, mysteriously as being not shitter than me. So
happy day. Well, let's get stuck in. First of all, can you tell us a bit about your work history, occupation, and anything else that you'd like to share?
Yeah, so it's weird, and this is going to be a very non-linear ADHD reply, but I've just changed job. I spent the last 23 years being a scientist. So I started my PhD in 1999, and I failed upwards, basically. I've always thought that my career I've got as far as I got from just being in the right place at the right time, because I was a terrible scientist. If you've got a protocol in the lab that's 30 steps long and you have to follow each step, and you've got ADHD, experiments don't work. So how I even finished a PhD, I don't know. But I was,
well done.
You haven't read it. It's the worst PhD thesis. It's like dog shit on paper. But I honestly thought that was me for the rest of my life, that I was going to be an academic. I'd end up as a professor. And then when lockdown happened, and life changed for all of us, but for me particularly, teaching at a university, everything moved online, and it was overnight. So I went from having a kind of pretty normal working life of traveling to work and coming back from work to suddenly being in this room that I'm talking to you from now, 7 days a week, 10 hours a day, staring at a screen with no students putting their cameras on. So it's just a blank screen with my face on it. And
I'm one of those students at the moment.
I totally get that, because one thing you can do with your camera off is fuck off and not actually listen to the lecture. And if it's being recorded, at the end of the day, your attendance is then down there for watching. But after 4 months of that, it was actually when that stopped, when it got to the Christmas break, and I'd been running on fumes and adrenaline, that I had a mental health crisis. I got to the point where I knew I wasn't coping, and that's when we'll probably talk about this later. That's when I looked for an ADHD diagnosis. But 2 years on from that, I realized I couldn't work in academia anymore, because it's singularly set up to not support adults with ADHD, because everything you've got to do, you write a paper of your science, and you have to send it to be critiqued by other scientists. So the rejection sensitivity you've got when somebody says this is shit, you've got to do those experiments instead. And writing grants, it's the same thing. You need funding for your science. So you write a grant and it gets rejected 8 times out of 10. So therefore, you're constantly dealing with rejection. Yeah. You're constantly getting kind of critiqued, and it's quite a backbitey, bitchy career. And they don't support ADHD. And I went through a process of getting an occupational health assessment and getting support, and I had to fight for everything. And I just thought, it's not for me. And I had so I suppose a chance meeting. I got diagnosed by a private healthcare company.
That was going to be my next question.
Yeah. We'll move on to that. And I've got a massive conflict of interest, because I now work for that company. And what happened was, while I was going through the diagnostic process, I wrote an article for The Conversation, which is kind of a dull academic website that writes stuff that's academic. And we wrote an article on ADHD. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned to the nurse that was titrating me, I've written this article, I don't know why. And she went, that's really good. You should meet our managing director, John. And then I had a phone call with him, and instantly he's got ADHD. He said, we've got to work together. We're going to have a lot of fun. And I started to think, there might be a different career here. And then after 6 months of struggling, eventually he phoned me up and said, just come and work for me. You know, he said, I know you're a flake, and I'm a flake as well. He said, but I'll put support around you, and you know, you'll be happy, and I am. And it's been a big change. Fantastic. So I'm now a kind of a communications lead, developing educational materials on ADHD and making sure that the organisation I work for are, you know, really, they do great work, but they're genuinely helping everybody from individuals who might have ADHD through to healthcare professionals understanding it better.
That's incredible. And so how did you come to suspect that you had ADHD? Because you said you were in mental health crisis, but was something that pushed you that way?
So this is back to Balloonhead. It's Alex. About 8 years. So I've known Alex. And if anybody listens to our podcast, we are like kind of an old married couple. I've known him since 2007, I think it was, when I went to Warwick Medical School, and he interviewed me.
The cat.
And he looked so dishevelled that I thought he was a student, an old fat student, but I thought he was a student. Because everybody else on the interview panel was wearing suits, and they were these kind of austere professors. And there was this guy in like a jumper and jeans. And when he took me into the interview room, I thought, why are you here? And it turned out that he was actually a kind of a senior lecturer and a very good scientist. And we got to know each other, and we've got a very, very deep, hateful connection with each other, which is also, you know, full of love, I have to say. And he phoned me up about 8 years ago and said, I've just been diagnosed with ADHD, and you're more ADHD than I am. Mm-hmm. And we laugh about this now because it's massively inappropriate. You shouldn't say to people, you've got ADHD. You can certainly introduce the concept and say, do you know that your symptoms are associated with this? But we didn't know that at the time, that it was inappropriate. But when he said it, my first thought was, and this is massively hypocritical because I hate myself with the passion of 1,000 dying suns. I have self-loathing, coming out of my ears. But my first thought was, if I take medication, it will change me. And I don't want to change me, which is just insane when you think that I hate myself, but I was scared of changing.
Yeah, so as if that was going to be awful.
Exactly. Anything would be better than me. But I kind of put out I did the test, the self-report symptom test, and all the ticks were in the grey, and it was obvious that I had lots of ADHD symptoms. But you know what? At the time, I wouldn't have been diagnosed, and we'll talk about this hopefully later on, because I didn't meet the criteria because I was doing well at work.
Yes,
I was in a happy marriage. I was in fuckloads of debt, but I was in a happy marriage, and generally I was getting on okay. And I just thought, well, if I am, I'm fine. So I kind of parked it and didn't really think about it at all until lockdown and until that mental health crisis. And I was talking to Alex a lot, and Alex kept on saying, you need to get this diagnosed, because he felt that all of my issues were ADHD, and I kind of knew that it was ADHD and something else. And I've since, it's taken a while, but last week or the week before, I was diagnosed with cyclothymia, which is a form of bipolar disorder. It's often called mild bipolar, so you have much shorter time between a hypomanic episode and a depressive episode, and that's what I wanted to get sorted out, and the ADHD. But the NHS, which I'm a massive supporter of, and all of its staff have been systematically defunded over the last 12 plus years, so that the resources just aren't there. So I phoned up the doctor and mentioned the fact, a massive trigger klaxon, as Alex would pronounce it here. I had some suicidal ideation, and that's why I contacted the GP, and the GP referred me for an assessment, and then that went to a psychiatrist, and they stuck me on a drug called quetiapine on like a toddler's dose. And just left me. Didn't tell me I had any condition, just left me on this toddler's dose of quetiapine. So I was thinking, okay. At the same time, I thought I've got to get the ADHD sorted. I was in such a state that, and I knew that there were issues with waiting lists, and that, it was likely I was going to wait 12, 24, 36 months. So I thought, I've got to pay for this privately. So I, at this point, begged my mum basically to help me out because I've got so much debt I couldn't afford. And I said, listen, I'm really struggling. And she was brilliant. She said, I'll pay for it all. And I said, if you can just pay for half, that's enough. So I got what at the time was a diagnosis within about 2 weeks of kind of booking. That whole system's changed because there's been this tsunami of people, obviously, with ADHD symptoms. And for me, it was almost underwhelming, because I kind of knew I had it, and it was just I just need to go through this process because then I can get the medication. But for me, it was quick and expensive rather than slow and free at the point of care, as it should be for everybody.
I suppose it's difficult, isn't it? Because obviously, the system is really backlogged and not working very smoothly. But I think we can all agree, we don't want to be critical of the NHS and the amazing work that they're doing. It is about the systems and the defunding and all the rest of it that are causing the problems, rather than trying to attack the NHS, which we would never want to do.
I completely understand that, and I agree. There are some areas that literally don't have an adult ADHD service. So if you go to your GP, they'll say there's nothing I can offer you, and that's because they are not aware that they don't have to have a service, that you can use something called right to choose to be asked to be referred to a private clinic. But if a GP doesn't know that, and you don't know that, and you go into your GP and they say nothing I can do, we haven't got a service, what do? You're stuck. You go home and think, okay, well, what do I do now? And it is, it is, you're right, it's a systematically under-resourced NHS, which is creaking post-COVID to just stay on its feet. And now it's got this huge number of people who've suddenly realised they've got ADHD symptoms because it's a bit more in the public arena, and they just can't cope with it.
Yeah. It's so interesting though, isn't it? Like you're saying, obviously we've got this whole idea about women and how, they're going late diagnosed. It's so interesting that you were diagnosed so late. But
I think, so this to me is something that I'm very passionate about. And I know that we chatted kind of before we came on air about this issue, that Alex and myself are in the most protected, kind of cosseted, looked after demographic possible. We're fat, middle-aged, middle-class white males. And the world looks after us. So we've got this kind of social power. And this is why we try with our kind of charity and with the podcast to genuinely have an equality, diversity and inclusivity angle. We try and hear other people's voices. We try and put that case forward, because the whole diagnostic process and treatment and awareness is unfair for both women, for people of colour, and for other groups, because the diagnostic criteria were designed in male children, in boys. And that's one of the reasons that 9 times as many boys get diagnosed with ADHD as girls. The other is that fundamentally girls are better at coping with stuff. And I know that sounds awful, but that means that girls and women tend to internalize the symptoms that are associated or that come with ADHD, so it becomes anxiety and not behavioural issues.
And that's boys, the thing as well, like girls are all looking at each other for how to behave, and so that's why the behaviour of masking, of coping, is just copying. It's like, do what they do, so we're not sticking out.
Even though I was an absolute little shit when I was younger, and I displayed probably a lot more of the male symptoms than the typical male symptoms that I did. And it amazes me to know that it's gone missed for so long based on my bad behaviour. I
think it's mad when you look back, isn't it? When I finally got to the point of diagnosis, and I thought you have to answer that question, because it's one of the diagnostic criteria that symptoms must have been there since childhood. And it suddenly clicked. I can remember my GP in this tiny little hamlet in Shropshire, where obviously nobody, even GPs, knew that ADHD existed, saying he's hyperactive, but he'll grow out of it. I can remember that appointment with that GP and him saying that. And all my school reports were, he's clever, but he needs to focus, doesn't pay attention.
Could try harder.
Exactly. I mean, that phrase that is burnt into my soul, I think. When you're trying as hard as you fucking can, and you're still not getting the same results. So for me, I think it's such an issue for those other groups, particularly women, that it's kind of a quest of Alex's and ours to try and speak up, because we've got this social power and because we're protected as white, middle-aged, middle-class men, to try and look out for other groups and to try and advocate for them.
That's fantastic. What a legend. Yeah. A pair of legends, rather, we should say.
So what do you think?
Alex isn't.
So what do you think ADHD has cost you?
The first thing that comes to mind actually is money. And I know it sounds weird, but I've got probably about 40 grand's worth of personal debt. So anybody that listens to the podcast will have heard of Mrs. ADHD, my long-suffering wife.
Lovely wife.
I am punching to get her, honestly. She is so
I've
far
actually
out
met her and he is.
I am. But basically, she's got low self-esteem, and I play on that to make sure that I can remain married. But between us, we just built up in 11 it's now 12 years of marriage, so much debt because we didn't know at the time. We both had ADHD. We're massive impulse spenders, and we're also big sufferers of the ADHD tax. So I cannot tell you the number of flights we've missed, gigs we haven't attended, hotels we've booked and not used, etc., which over the years have literally cost thousands and thousands of pounds. So the first thing it's cost me is money. I don't really have financial security. We had to remortgage the house about 6 months ago, thinking we could pay off all of our debt, and it wasn't valued at enough. So we've paid off Mrs. ADHD's debt, but I'm still left with saddled with a shed load of debt. So the first thing it's cost me is money. I don't have the financial freedom, and that's someone that's worked in well-paid jobs as well.
Yeah.
As well as that, it's cost me, as I've looked back. One of the things that I find fascinating about ADHD is that many of us are neurodevelopmentally delayed. And what that means is that when you're 18, you might have had the neurodevelopmental age of maybe a 14 or 15-year-old, and you get to 21 and you've maybe got the neurodevelopmental age of an 18-year-old. And I wasn't even half a person till I was 27. And I can even kind of remember specifically that year finding myself. I was massively shy. I was hugely afraid of rejection. I didn't have a relationship for 10 years because of that, just fear of rejection. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to own this. I'm going to be celibate and single and own it, not because I look freakish or I've got no personality. Both of those facts are arguable. But because I was just so afraid of being rejected. So it cost me. And listen, I've ended up with my soulmate, the ridiculous, funny, beautiful Mrs. ADHD, but it cost me 10 years of interesting experiences, let's put it that way, because I wasn't a person. And the final thing I'll say it's cost me is my mental health at times. And particularly when it comes with all the shit ADHD comes with. There are very few of us who've just got ADHD and nothing else. Most of us have either got an anxiety issue, a mood issue, migraines, thyroid problems, hyperflexible joints, addiction issues, eating disorders. There's so much shit that comes with
fun
it.
and games, isn't it?
Oh, it is. No, it is. It's the second D in ADHD stands for delightful, as far as I know. But I can think back over now 47 years of my life, and the bits that I can remember, a lot of the worst bits I can now see was because I just, I had ADHD, didn't know it. I didn't know how to appropriately respond emotionally to things. I was a massive mess, hating myself for being unreliable and forgetful and doing all the things that we do. And a lot of that self-loathing, I can't shed now. I'm having some counselling and it's helping, but it's this deeply ingrained, concrete image of myself, which is you're shit, you're useless, you're unreliable, there's nothing about you that's good. And that's because for years I had ADHD, and we are square pegs trying to fit into a round hole for the whole of our lives, because the world is not designed for us. It's designed for, I hate the word neurotypical because I think it's divisive, but it is designed for neurotypical people by neurotypical people. And we're these weird square pegs that don't really fit in.
It's so funny, isn't it? Like what you were saying about the kind of developmental age, like it really just lands so much. Like we've talked a lot about how, well, we're basically 20, really.
Yeah, but I don't understand being a grown-up.
No.
I don't feel like one.
And I used to joke, like long before I knew anything about ADHD, I would always say, I wasn't even in the room until I was 23. And that's the truth. I literally was just like, oh, right. Oh, this is actually happening then. Like that's really how it was at 23. I was like, oh shit, no, I'm operating this and I have to do things. Right. Okay.
That's it. In turning 18 and, having opportunities like alcohol and everything else that's available to you, but not having the mentality to deal with what that gives you,
consequences.
So much of that just resonates like hard with me. That whole like I say, not being a person. Alex often says not being a real boy. For me it was she's
a little bit creepy, but like
it is. But let's face it, Alex is creepy in looks and personality. But for me it was not being a real man. I had nothing. This is going to sound like I'm showing off, and I'm really not, but I've had an externally successful career. So academically, I was an associate professor. I was on track for being a professor. I was lucky in that one of the things that ADHD has given me is my ability to perceive risk is completely fucked. So the kind of things that would scare some people, like going on television, for me, it's just a thing that you do. It's not kind of interesting or or scary. So I've done quite a lot of television work as a TV scientist, for example. Yeah. And to me, it's not something that I fear. But before the age of 27, I couldn't talk to people. I have never gone up to a female in a club and tried to pull them, whatever the word is, or try to chat up line. I've never done it because I was always just so scared of rejection and assumed that, of course, they're going to reject me, that I didn't do that thing. And it's mad to now think that it's not confidence. I've just got this personality that before the age of 27 did not exist. I was a nothing. I was a nobody. I was a kind of cloud of vapor compared to the person I eventually, hopefully, developed into.
Can I ask? It's a bit off piece, but like when you're talking about the RSD, because I really struggle with that a lot. We all do, but I feel like it's like my defining thing. I wonder like how you feel now, like when you're putting out all of this stuff into the world. So we're just starting on this journey, putting the podcast out, doing the bloody social media, which is kind of like, this love-hate bane of my life, got to do it, but then totally feel like I'm going to get RSD everything. Nobody likes it. Like, how do you cope with that? Like, do you feel the RSD with regards to that?
So I used to get insane rejection sensitivity, largely because I was an academic, to the point where I got promoted to senior lecturer first of all, and someone said to me, and it was largely because I'd done all this TV work, my career was built on being a science communicator, and somebody said to me kind of half jokingly, "Oh, go on television, get a promotion." I didn't speak to that person again, because they'd made that little and they're 3 offices down from me kind of thing. I just couldn't engage with that person because I just thought, this is awful. Is that what people think of me?
Yeah.
And I genuinely wish I could tell you either the moment or the mechanism in which it eased. But a lot of it was through talking to Alex and him kind of coaching me before I even knew ADHD was really the problem. But I got to a point in time where I realized it doesn't fucking matter what people think. Yeah. And I know that's a really difficult concept for many people with ADHD to grasp, but it just doesn't. And I'm lucky, therefore, in that the RSD that I get tends to be about silly little things. So if I message Alex and he doesn't reply, I get massive RSD. Like, oh God, if I upset him again.
Yeah, retracing your steps. I should have put an emoji. Exactly. It was a joke.
Exactly, and it took him about 3 months, probably because he was enjoying the fact that I had RSD, to say, if you message me in the morning, I've got to get 2 kids up, then take the dog for a walk, then take one of the kids to school, then get back and help my wife get to work in XYZ. And he wasn't messaging because he was busy. But in my head, it's, oh God, no, I've pissed him off, I've offended him. So silly little things. Yeah, I get RSD about. Weirdly, kind of big things like putting yourself out there for people to critique you. I think I've been prepared through being an academic to just not give a fuck what anyone thinks. And that is very much a mindset that isn't easy to adopt. It can take a long time to realize that, the only opinions that are important are the people that matter. And that's the people close to you, and everybody else, what they think is not important because they are not important to your life. And when I coach people and when we talk about this, it's one of the difficult things about RSD is there isn't really an effective treatment for it, considering that 99% of us have got it. But it's about learning to just care less and to focus your regard with how people think about you to the people that are important.
You worry about what everyone's thinking about you, but the majority of the time you're never going to find out.
You're never going to know.
No, of course.
And they probably don't give a shit anyway.
And that is fundamentally the issue, but it's accepting that that's the problem, isn't it? Because the 3 of us can all agree, that it doesn't matter what other people think. And I can guarantee you at some point in the next 4 days or 5 days, I will send an email and then when somebody doesn't reply or they reply in a certain way, I'll get massive RSD and think, oh God, I can't believe I've offended that person, or they think that what I've done is rubbish, when actually they didn't say that at all. Because what we do is we don't just read between the lines, we read different lines. We make stuff up that isn't there. We worry about stuff that's going to happen in the future that's incredibly unlikely to happen. So one of the things Mrs. ADHD does is she will lie awake all night having a conversation in her head with her boss about getting fired. So she'll go through every possible scenario. And then in the morning she'll get into work and her boss will walk in and just say, morning. And she'll say morning, and he'll walk in and she'll think, oh, didn't sack me. And it's crazy to think that we do that. It's disabling it alone, just that RSD fear of stuff that's never going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so true. So I feel like we've gone off piste a bit. Should we dive back into what we were?
Probably
I have no idea where we were.
Well, okay, so I think we could go to what has changed for you since diagnosis.
What's changed? I mean, everything.
Yeah,
everything's changed. Not just my career, but my, I suppose, vocation, if you like. I genuinely did not have a goal in life. I was working. I very much believe in you work to live, you don't live to work.
Yeah.
So I was, like I say, externally successful in that I'd had very rapid promotions at work, and I was well thought of at work, but I didn't care if I was a scientist or not. I didn't want a legacy. I didn't care how many grants or papers I got. It was just something that I happened to do. Yeah. Now, through getting diagnosed and then starting up ADHD Adult UK, and then turning that into a podcast, and then turning it into a charity, and then now getting to work for an organization which is already massively helping ADHD adults, but is going to, over the next 6 to 12 months, massively expand what it's doing. I've got I wouldn't call it a reason to live, but I've got a crusade that I'm on now.
You found your
I literally am trying not to cry, so I just say like...
You found your
I'm now going to aim to make you cry. You realise that's now my goal.
It's not going to be that difficult.
It's really not hard.
I'm rubbing my hands. But that's because you're doing good work.
Sorry, I just wanted to say, because we're obviously going to introduce you properly to the podcast, but like you really have helped us. Like the two of you have actually really helped us, like
understand ourselves and
and everything, like through the process of diagnosis, like how it's going to work and this criteria that you have to meet, because you know it for so many people it is so intimidating to even make appointments or then be there that you're so worried that you're forgetting really important things and that could cost you getting diagnosed. You know, that's. So, we just really, really have to thank you so much, because, what you're doing is really, really helping people.
It's life-changing.
Yeah.
What I'll do is I'll take Alex's line on this, which is we do it for purely narcissistic reasons. If we actually help anybody, it's an unwanted side effect of what we're doing.
Well, we said that in the last one. When we were uploading, I was like, "Oh yeah, we do it because it's what we want to talk about." I was like, "God, that sounded really shit. That's not what I meant at all."
No, I know. Yeah, but the thing is, what we do is we always diminish ourselves as ADHD adults, don't we? And I can't tell you the impact. Every message that we get that says something like, "Thank you for the podcast. I finally understand myself," or "I just listened to every episode of the podcast and now finally I feel seen," or "I've got my diagnosis date. Your video helped us." Every message of those that I read makes me feel that I like myself, and the only 2 times I like myself are that, or when I've maybe taken a substance that's not entirely legal. So
thank you. You just pulled me back from crying with that one.
Yes. So for me, it's almost selfish in when I'm helping people. I actually, when I read that little message, and every message I get, I screen capture and I send it to Alex. Yeah, largely because largely because I run Instagram and he does Twitter, and the Instagram account's way better. So it's just show him up really when people message us. But for both of us, it's huge when we see these messages from people just saying that you've had an impact. When we originally set out, we kind of said if we change one person's life, then job done. We've done something good. And to think that kind of more than that, we joke about having 15 listeners or 16 listeners, but for us that would have been a success. If we'd have helped 15 people, then that would have been beyond our wildest dreams.
Well, that's it. We've just heard from someone today. We had a press release today, an article like in the local press about what we're doing.
That's amazing.
And in that article, it mentioned that we'd been helping someone that was at university. They didn't realize she could get help through the university, even though she didn't have a medical diagnosis. Yeah. And after that, just about 10 minutes after that article was released, that girl messaged me to say that she's just had her diagnosis. Yeah. And she would have never known that she could have went to the uni to get the help if it wasn't for us. And that
this is where I'm going to maliciously try and make you cry now, which makes me sound like the utter bastard that I am. But it's so important for me to say to you that you need to kind of step back and look at that. and realize the impact you've had on someone's life. That's somebody who could have gone for the next 10, 20, 30 years or the rest of their life as an undiagnosed ADHD adult that could have failed relationships, failed jobs, worse health outcomes, etc., etc. You've changed their life, and you need to start crying more loudly so people can hear it. First of all,
sucking through the eyeballs is very funny.
But you genuinely need to. What first thing I say is get used to it, because you're going to help more people, and more people are going to get in touch and say thank you. But just take 2 seconds to pat yourself on the back and say, "Fuck me."
Well done, Dawn.
That is more than most people get the chance to do in their lives in terms of helping others. Most of us are genuinely beneficent and benevolent, and we want to help people, but most people don't get the opportunity. What you've done is you've built a platform where you can help real people who are in, awful situations. So just hats off to you guys. I think you're awesome.
Thank you very much. That's really, really kind of you to say. And I'm not going to cry.
I'm not crying. You're crying.
So I guess it's really hard to follow that. I think the next question.
Just move on.
Is, if you could implement change to the diagnosis process, what would it be? And that's a big one, isn't it?
It is. It's like it's a podcast episode in itself, and it's maybe I'm going to steal that idea, and we're going to do it on our podcast. And we'll obviously not credit you for it or give you any any shout outs. No, of course you would. So the problem with the diagnostic process, the problems are, as we said, first of all, it's not set up to be equal for everybody. It's still based on these very kind of outdated, if you like, tests, largely run in white male boys. But the bigger problem we've got is, and again, this is not bashing any healthcare profession in the NHS, but most or many healthcare professionals don't really know what ADHD is, and certainly don't know that it's a disorder that adults get. Yeah. And, this is one of the things I'm really ashamed of. I as a scientist, was a biomedical scientist. I taught neurophysiology. And when Alex phoned me up 8 years ago and said I've got ADHD, my first thought was, what? Well, adults get ADHD. And I thought I was pretty clued up when it came to medicine. And the problem is that we've got a a GP with ADHD who follows us, and she got in touch to ask some advice and questions. And I said, can you just let me know, how much training did you have? You're a GP. How much training did you have kind of throughout your medical school career and GP training in ADHD? And she said, we had 1 hour when somebody came in and told us it was a disorder that boys get that they grow out of.
Yeah.
And this is clearly someone who was educated in medicine a while ago, but I would suspect that, the level of education that the gatekeepers to referrals, so GPs get, is not that great. If you specialize in psychiatry, yes, you're more likely to know about it. But at the general practitioners, our family doctors, the people you go to who control that process, a lot of them don't know it's a thing. Yeah. And we get all the time people saying, I went to see my GP and they wouldn't diagnose me because I've got a degree. They wouldn't diagnose me because I've got a job. And
to interject there, because there is so much noise being made about it right now. Yeah. We've had people saying that they haven't been diagnosed because they're trying to jump on a bandwagon. And it's trendy.
And it's a massive problem. Largely because of lockdown. Lockdown has, and this has been studied actually and published, that lockdown has caused ADHD-like symptoms in some people. Mm-hmm. So for some people, the pressure of just being stuck in the same house for a long time created the symptoms that we get. But what they don't have is a history of it since they were a child, for example. Yeah. And that's added to this problem in the GPs who are poorly trained in some cases in identifying or knowing that ADHD is a thing, also now have to contend with some people who've got the same symptoms but a very different history because it's not ADHD. So in terms of changing it, there's so much that I would do. The first thing I do is actually look in those other groups other than male boys at the symptoms that we have. I'd like the acknowledgement in the diagnostic criteria of our executive dysfunction. So that is those higher level thinking skills that we don't have. So planning, task management, cognitive inhibition, so stopping those impulses. We've pretty much all got that. I don't know anybody with ADHD that doesn't have executive dysfunction. Yeah. And therefore I would rather that was included in the diagnosis rather than it has to affect you in more than one domain of your life. And I've spoken to somebody this morning who's been refused a referral partly because they are a homemaker. and don't have a job. So they found it difficult to evidence that their ADHD symptoms were affecting them in more than one domain of their life. That was part of the reason that they were told, well, we've raised the threshold for diagnosis, which is bollocks, and you don't meet that criteria. It seems ridiculous that particularly women can be discriminated against if you are a homemaker, because you can't say, well, it's affecting my work and home. Exactly. And because there's so little information about what is considered a domain of your life, actually you could say, well, your social life is part of your life. So if you've got issues with social anxiety because of ADHD, that and home life is enough to get a diagnosis. But people don't know this. So you go to the GP and just get immediately discriminated against by what is. This is the other thing that I would change. I don't want to linger too long on this because you'll run out of time or I'll bore the shit out of you. That the whole
we might just have to start another meeting.
We'll start another meeting in a minute. We've already got there.
The whole process is ableist. Everything from working up the courage and getting the information to see the GP, to receiving a letter from whichever service is assessing you, telling you, what date you've got to do something. It's all ableist because if we've got ADHD, we'll struggle to put sometimes the right date in the diary or the right time. If you've got to remember a phone number or a login for an online service, you might forget what the password is. On the day of your diagnosis or your assessment, where your whole identity is going to change, there's a good chance you're going to be a bit anxious. And for some people, they might be too anxious to actually attend that session. And what will happen is, if it's NHS, they'll either just get kicked off the waiting list, or they'll have so much RSD at having missed an appointment, they won't engage again because they'll be scared that they've pissed off the people that are going to assess them. So the whole process is ableist, and it needs to be rewritten to be neurodivergent friendly. So there needs to be a much friendlier way of working with people like us who just don't have the brain that's developed to allow us to plan, to do things in a timely fashion, to make sure we've got all the information, to make sure we remember all the things we want to tell these healthcare professionals. It's not set up for us.
Thank you so much for sharing that, because it's so insightful, and it's so difficult, isn't it? Because I think that's how we both feel. Is like, obviously Dawn's we're in very different positions. And Dawn is still in limbo waiting.
So I started uni last year, went through a whole kind of rigmarole of self-improvement because I was in a really horrible place. And that led me to look inwards, and that self-awareness pushed me into looking for this ADHD diagnosis. I approached my doctor last May. I'd applied for uni and everything at that time as well. Got a diagnosis through the uni, which I started in September. They sent me to an educational psychologist in November. They told me, you scored full marks. You're 100% ADHD. Best I've ever done in any test. And I have answers now, but I'm still in limbo to get a medical diagnosis. And now that I'm at uni, I can't afford to go private. So I just have to wait it out.
And I think that there's so many people who will absolutely feel those words as resonating very deeply, because there are so many people that have just a similar story. It might not be that they got that kind of, if you like, informal diagnosis through a university or through an employer, but there are so many people that are in limbo, waiting with no idea when their appointment's going to be. And again, Mrs. ADHD is a good example. She's still waiting. She asked to be referred through Right to Choose.
Right.
So for anyone that's listening that doesn't know what Right to Choose is, if you live in England, and this is an England-specific thing, you can ask your GP to refer you to a specific healthcare provider or service. So you can ask to be referred to a list. I think there's about 6 private healthcare providers. And because I work for one of them, I'm trying not to mention them because that's a conflict of interest. And my wife asked to be referred, as is her right, through Right to Choose, to the company I now work for. And the GP went, okay, and then just referred us to local services instead. Now that means she's been waiting probably about 12 months, about the same amount of time. In that time, she's had one assessment. They didn't tell her who was assessing her. They didn't tell her what the assessment was. They just said, we'll call you at this time. She spoke to somebody. She doesn't know what role they had for an hour. And they then said, okay, the next thing that will happen is we'll do a video call with you and your husband. Didn't say when it would be. Then about 3 months later, a couple of forms came through the post, which said, fill in these forms. Same kind of questions she'd answered in the interview or the assessment in rabbit ears. But they said on the forms, if you don't return these in 14 days, we kick you off the waiting list. And that for me is a big red light that says we are trying to trim people off the waiting list, because again, if you've got ADHD, there's a very good chance you'll either forget or just get something wrong in that process.
Exactly. I had to confine myself to the bath for 3 hours without my mobile phone so that I could get my forms completed.
Yeah.
In the bath. I was like, a raisin by the time I came out of the bath.
Yeah.
But that was the only way I was going to get them done.
I totally get that. So when I was diagnosed, I was positive for, I think it was 14 out of the 18 domains, but 2 of them, I got so bored with the forms, I just put no problem, even though there clearly was a problem.
I think my last comment on the form was read my report from the education psychologist, because I was just done with it.
I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's so like, with you in that position, especially, but with all of us, for you with Mrs. ADHD, it's like, it makes you feel so, I'm losing the words because I'm so wound up, but it's like, you're so compelled to just be like, Christ, with the knowledge that you have about everything. And then you just go, no, this is really not right. Yeah. Like, what can we do? Can we do something? Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Yeah.
But this is why what you're doing and what Balloonhead and I are doing is so important, because, we've got an element of social power, if you like. Certainly Alex and I are, because again, like I said, we're in this position where as white middle class males, we're pretty much unchallenged.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so important that people like you and to some extent me, but not Alex, are putting information out there that's good information. I can't be nice to him. Alex was once very kind to me and nice on Twitter. I got a paper published in a very prestigious journal, and I can just see what he said because I printed it off and framed it. And he said, it kills me to say it, but this is really impressive, well done. And I printed it off and framed it. And now we're so scared of ever saying something nice to each other that we always have to say something nasty. So when Alex was really struggling recently and sent me a message saying he was struggling, my response was, listen, you need to step back, take a deep breath, and realize you're a fucking bellend and nobody likes you. But that's how we communicate. That's how we de-weaponize it. But you listen, the point I'm trying to make through a very circuitous ADHD way is that what we are doing as 2 organizations that clearly have the same kind of remit is we are helping people who are in that position where they're either in limbo and they need to learn about themselves, or they don't know what the process is to get a diagnosis, or they don't know what to say to the doctor or to the psychiatrist. It's really important that actually the anger that we probably all share at how ableist that process is, the deep unfairness of it all actually drives us to try and improve the system. And this is one of the reasons I have changed career, to go and work for somebody who I know are going to make the system better and are developing things that are actually going to help people. Yeah. And that's why I think we've got this opportunity to do that, to help people who just feel utterly abandoned.
Yeah, 100%. So
I have no idea where we are. So tell us some positives.
Yeah. So this is, for me, this is a really interesting issue, and I'm going to use more guarded language than I have so far, because what we try and do at ADHD Adult UK is share evidence-based information. We do obviously personal reflections and top tips, but we try as much as possible to look at what science and clinical studies tell us. And there is evidence that there are positives for some people with ADHD, but the studies are pretty shit, to be honest. And what I think is really important for everybody with ADHD, their families, their friends, to understand is we are not all the same. That there is diversity within the neurodivergence that is ADHD. Some of us are massively successful, film stars, actors, chefs, musicians, writers, incredibly externally successful people who internally are probably a hot mess like we are, but they've got this external success. And often if those people, and I'll give an example because he fucks me off, Rory Bremner, who goes out and advocates saying that, the reason he's successful is because of his ADHD. Mm-hmm. He very firmly believes that his ADHD has given him success. And I can't challenge that because I don't know. But I am always worried that statement is going to diminish the 99% of people with ADHD who haven't had a stellar career and have got all these issues.
No.
And well, exactly that. The second D is disorder. It is a disorder for most of us. Yeah. And Alex and I often talk about these 3 stages of being undiagnosed, treated, and managed. Undiagnosed adults with ADHD generally costs society about £18,000 a year because of the increased health costs, accidents, unemployment, underemployment, etc. If you get somebody treated, that improves, but it's not a cure-all. And most people that get diagnosed are given medication, and then off you go out into the world with this complete new identity and no idea how to deal with it, and some tablets to take. And actually, that is challenging. So when you look at the evidence, there is evidence of positives. It's not great. So there is an element of creative thinking that adults with ADHD have been shown to have. It's called divergent thinking. There are some elements of entrepreneurial thinking, which there's some evidence behind. People are generally, in these studies, more entrepreneurial, although their businesses don't tend to be any more successful. So we tend to kind of steer a little bit away from positives, largely because we worry about kind of,
diminishing
people, diminishing people,
positivity.
Exactly. But I had a good think about this question, and a good think for me is about 30 seconds. And actually, for me, that there are positives of getting a diagnosis and having ADHD, in that what I'm doing, in the same way that what you're doing, is helping people. And I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't have ADHD. We wouldn't have set up a charity. We wouldn't have started a podcast. We wouldn't have set up kind of an online support group. I'd still be a very unhappy scientist, sitting at university with no real career aspirations. And so for me, I suppose the positives are that my ADHD and the suffering, I suppose, I've been to has actually led for me to have this crusade to help other people. So that's my main positive, is learning that I'm part of this club, this tribe, and finding my people has made me pivot. I say halfway through my life, I'm not going to make 60. Later on in my life, it's allowed me to pivot and do something that I think is that's me. That's what I want to do. That's my calling, if you know what I mean.
That's definitely that really, really resonates. And I nearly did a little cry again. But I think
we've been saying this a lot. It's like we kind of like we've started doing something, and we just feel like we were meant to meet, and we were meant to
how
do
we
this.
met. It was all just so serendipitous. Our age, like everything, it's just absolutely ridiculous. And then the differences in us as well, right down to the things that we can do with the podcast and everything. It's just so strange. But it just feels like, for me personally, like I really, really did hit really, really rock bottom, and it took me a really long time to get back up again. And then it is like, obviously when you've had mental health crisis, I'm going to try not to go on and on now, but when you have been there, like, I don't know, my experience is that it never really truly leaves you. Like that's there now, right? So then it's like, it can so quickly weave back in, especially I would argue as a woman with hormones, etc. It's suddenly like, in those moments where it would be like, sorry to be really grim, like, what is the point? Like, what's the point? What am I doing? What's the point? Those horrible moments. And it's like, to get the understanding that you're not a worthless piece of shit is one thing. And then actually to be like, no, I give enough about this, that I need to do something about it, is then like, it does. I don't want to say calling because it makes it sound like a twat, but you know what I mean? It does feel
Did I say calling earlier? I'm now questioning whether or not I said calling.
And if you did, I just called you a twat, and I'm sorry.
Clearly, listen, I've been called far worse things, to be honest, and do on a daily basis by Mrs. ADHD get called far worse things than a twat. So I take that. That's a compliment in my world.
If we can help people not have to suffer for as long as we have, then that's exactly what we're going to do. It feels like the right thing to do.
It's a purpose. I did not have a purpose. I had a job, and I did it, and it didn't ever feel like a job until towards the end. But now I feel like I've actually got a purpose, and that is a very different thing to just having a job.
100%. So I guess that probably brings us to almost a close. If you would please be so kind to tell us what the most ADHD thing you have done this week is.
It's got an obvious winner, but there are so many things I do on a day-to-day basis, which largely involve working memory and the issues we've got with executive function. But I, as part of my new job, and I've been in this job now for less than 2 weeks, was asked to drive about 50 miles to give a really important presentation to the owner and founder of the company, the like head or chief psychiatrist, the head of legal. So it's a big presentation of my plan for what I'm going to do. And I'm driving along, and I'm about 3 miles away from where I've got to get to using my phone as a sat nav, and a friend calls me, and it's a friend I really wanted to talk to. And so I answered the call, not realizing that it would then switch off the sat nav and not tell me where I had to turn.
Oh no!
So I was just driving along happily, chatting to this friend for about 10 minutes,
having a lovely old time.
Exactly, just some stuff that I really need to talk to this friend about. And then when we said goodbye, I thought, hang on, what we're doing? Where was I going? Oh yeah, no, sat nav. Put it on. I'd driven like 7 or 8 miles past where I was meant to turn off. And I was then late for this meeting. So not only is it this really important meeting where I've got to not look like a cock, it's almost written on my hand, don't look like a cock in this meeting. So not only am I now having to emotionally prepare for this really important meeting, I've driven the wrong way, I'm late for the meeting, and just turn up as a ruffled mess of, I'm so sorry. And in the end, it all went well. But, just for a few minutes, I thought, fuck this. May as well go home, give up the job. That's fine. I'm sure I can do something else.
Just like in that moment, like just doing what you're doing and completely forgetting.
Amazing.
I completely lost and even forgot why I was driving somewhere. But I know it sounds almost made up, but I genuinely just, because when I closed the call, it didn't go back to the sat nav. It was just my phone screen. I thought, where am I? What am I doing? And
easily done.
That's the thing, isn't it? We do these things, and we then beat ourselves up for it. And this is one of the things that Alex and I harp on about is emotional acceptance of your ADHD, and that is getting to a point where you can de-weaponize it a bit. And if you can laugh at it, if you can, and some people are obviously in very dire situations, and I never again want to diminish them, but if you can de-weaponize your ADHD by laughing at the things we do 30 times a day. I cannot make a cup of tea, as you probably know, without fucking forgetting. So it might sometimes take me 6 or 7 goes. And
I'm like that.
And there's still that one cup that I've lost. I don't know where it is in the house. I made a cup of tea about 6 months ago. I've never found it. I lost my trousers on the way to the Houses of Parliament. I never found them. So they weren't at home. They weren't at work. They weren't in the car. That I've got half a suit in my wardrobe, and I don't know where the trousers are. And you have to laugh at it, because otherwise you fucking cry. It's ludicrous. So
I laugh
so
at myself on a daily basis at the things I do. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Yours were. Can you tell yours?
Let's do my one.
Yeah.
So this week, mine was, I went to make my dinner. I threw a couple of wraps in the oven to heat them up, and the phone rang. So the washing machine was on. So of course I go upstairs so that the noise of the washing machine wouldn't interfere with the phone call. Sat on my bed, took the phone call, and then realized that there was a smell of burning. Went downstairs whilst I was mid phone call with someone quite important that I couldn't stop having this conversation with. Had to turn off the oven and deal with all the smoke and stuff. Now, thankfully, in a way, it kind of helped. The smoke alarm didn't go off because, of course, I took the battery out of it to replace it. And it's still sitting on the table waiting for me to get a new battery to put in.
Yeah.
I really shouldn't laugh, but everything you're saying is just...
It's ridiculous.
It's like a cartoon of my life. I can look back at all the things. It's just the stuff that we do, isn't it?
I know. And then yesterday I did, I haven't learned a lesson. I left the hob on. I've got an electric hob, and I left it on for about 3 hours after I made dinner.
Yeah.
You can't write this stuff.
No, you really can't.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What were you on?
Mine's not actually that exciting, because it doesn't sound as dramatic, but mine's all in my head. But it was my birthday on Monday. And
happy birthday.
Thank
She's
you.
milking it.
I am milking it. And I got quite a lot of Facebook things, messages and things saying, people from different periods of my life. So basically, when I kind of lost my marbles, so to speak, I came away from social media. I'd been so present on it, trying to flog my business, and I was in Ibiza and all of this stuff. And then I just went, oh my God, retreated. And then I was on there, got all these messages, and was so excited that the next day I was like, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to go back on Facebook. It's absolutely fine. I'm going to do it. So I did this post. And then as soon as I'd pressed it, I was like, oh my God, why have I done that? And it's still bothering me now. I'm like, should I take it down? Should I take it down? It's just driving me insane. It's so terrible, because it's not so much I think part of it was like, okay, well, you can get over the fact that everyone hates you and you don't have any mates because loads of people have just wished you a happy birthday. But then to put it out, if not that many people like it, for any of the loads of reasons why people don't engage with things,
of course.
Now I'm embarrassed that people can see that not that many people have liked it. It's so weird.
It's that thing we do where, again, we don't just kind of overthink things, we like treble overthink things. And this is one of the reasons I also stepped back from Facebook in particular, because it's a fucking cesspool of arseholes mostly. The reason I stepped back from Facebook was because it was
seeing
for
what
mental
everyone's
health.
thinking.
Exactly. Well, I mean, come on, let's face it is. And Instagram's just happier. It's nice pictures and it's people being nice, but I've never really
and you get to
engaged
choose
with Facebook.
the content you see.
Exactly that. And I get the same thing on birthdays where I'd like to say lots of people, but not that many people like me. A few people on my birthday, even though I'd never post it, will say happy birthday. And that's the only time I go on, is to say thank you, thanks so much, thank you. Probably only 5 times, and then that's done. But yeah, I don't really post on there because that same reason, because actually it got to the point where I was so afraid of offending someone or getting in an argument or somebody offending me and me then overthinking what I say to them next time I see them, that I totally get that. Get it.
Even to the point that then I was like, with everything that was going on in the news that day, I was like, was that culturally insensitive? Should I not be posting about like all this stuff? It's like, I just shouldn't go on it, basically.
Yeah.
That's ADHD wang, that is. We're just, we overthink everything to the point of, spending all the time what you could have been doing nice, happy things, thinking, why did I say that thing? Why did I say that thing? Why did I say that thing? It's just awful. And just before I go, I just want to say again, largely in an attempt to make you cry, I just want to say again, thank you for inviting me on. Thank you for everything that you do, because you're putting yourself, and I know this from personal experience. We talked about that whole almost bearing your soul on social media and putting content out there that can be criticized. You are wearing your heart on your sleeve and you are putting yourself in the public eye to help other people. And that is fucking awesome.
So that was Dr. James Brown.
I know. Can you believe it?
I absolutely cannot.
What's he doing talking to us and being so nice?
Can you actually just think back
not
to a
because
month
he's
ago?
not nice. Not to retrace that. I meant like actually listening to us talk nonsense. But yeah.
A month ago.
I know.
Did you think we'd be here?
No.
Doing this?
It's absolutely ridiculous. And I've said absolutely. And it's really overwhelming. And we're both basically crying a lot of the time.
My mind is kind of blown. Like my head actually hurts today because of everything. It's just been
really overwhelming.
Yeah, but in a good way.
In a good way.
In a great way.
In a good way. So thank you so much to everyone for listening to us and for reaching out to us. I think that's the real one, is like to actually know that, our words are landing with people and people are resonating and taking something valuable away from it is just so... Yeah. This is a quick interruption from the future. It's Laura here. I just wanted to let you know that Dawn stepped down from the podcast to give her all to her degree in October 23. She explained all in the Series 2 episode called It's Always Darkest Before the Dawn. From that point, I continue ADHDAF solo and I'm about to start the 3rd UK tour, which will actually be the last of this nature. I would love to meet you in real life at Alien Nation. The ADHDAF live events are to connect local ADHDers, raise ADHD awareness, and they start in April 2024 and finish in July in Scotland and England. Undiagnosed ADHD made me feel alienated from society. The shows, featuring very special guests from the podcast, explore going from feelings of alienation to discovering an alien nation. Tickets are available via the link in the blurb of this episode, also via the link in bio on ADHDAF podcast Instagram. I really hope to see you at these totally unique events, the last ever ADHDAF tour of this nature. Self-diagnosis is valid, no diagnosis necessary, and I invite you to encourage the people in your life that need to learn more about ADHD from a late diagnosed perspective. So come along. Adults only, all genders welcome. If you'd like to come but you feel nervous about coming alone, please don't. Just let me know and I will arrange for a welcome party to greet you at the door and seat you with others just like you. I don't want you to miss out on the last hurrah, so grab tickets whilst they last and come hang with the gang in real life. If undiagnosed undiagnosed ADHD made you feel like an alien, you are not alone. There's a whole planet of us. If you can't make any of the live events or you would like to connect online sooner, come and join us in the Planet ADHDAF peer support community via the link in the description to chat to myself and a whole load of other like-minded legends the world over on Discord and Zoom. Membership includes body doubling, accountability squads, a self-care club, monthly advice from an ADHD coach, blogs, vlogs, behind-the-scenes content, exclusives, and discounts on all merch, downloadables, and events tickets. I really hope to chat to you soon, either online in the Planet ADHDF peer support community or in real life at the Alien Nation Tour. Big love. So I guess we're just going to conclude with our differences because as James was our first guest, it really got us thinking about how we communicate. Yeah. And in that, we found another difference in how our ADHD presents in us both. Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, it's about communication, essentially.
Yeah.
And I am hyper aware that I don't ask a lot of questions and I'm quite bad at not asking questions. And it's not because I'm not interested.
Yes.
I am interested, but I think a lot of the time that my head is just going 10 to the dozen and I'm struggling hard to concentrate on what's being said as well as what's going on in my head.
And like retaining the thing that you want to say so you don't forget it. And
So a lot of the time when I'm in conversation, I relate. If I've got something that's relatable to what that person's saying, I'll relate back with my story or my experience. Whereas I notice with you, and the difference with you is that you're great at asking questions.
I think the thing is, it's two things really. It is a real... I'm so intrigued. It's like an inquisitiveness, but like a hyper inquisitiveness.
Because the thing is, I have that intrigue as well, but I just cannot focus enough to think of a question.
Yeah. Whereas like what I've also noticed relating to our last episode about masking is that sometimes I will use the questions as a mask.
Yeah.
But not in this setting, because I am genuinely very intrigued and interested and I want to get as much information into the podcast, and every single statement leads to another thought where I'm like, oh my God, what about this or what about that? But like in a masking situation, I could just be like literally bored to tears or feeling inadequate in a situation, and it's like deflecting onto the other person. So like, you know, to be in a conversation with somebody but actually not really give anything away because you're constantly just like, so what about this? Or what about this? Oh, I remember you said this, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm terribly interested. Actually, I'm really, really not. But lovely to speak to you. See you later.
Whereas I get myself into trouble because I'm oversharing because I just don't shut up about myself.
And on that note, grab your tickets for Alien Nation Live UK Tour via the link in the blurb of this episode and come hang with the gang in real life or in the online peer support community Planet ADHD AF. Shall we shut up?
Yeah, let's shut up.
ADHD as females, ADHDAF, ADHD as females.